Hello, Bassline Band. Welcome to the third installment of our Chrome Lab Song Maker composition project. We'll be adding in a bass line today in our lowest octave, and I'm really excited to help you with this process of composing and adding your own bass line to your song. So what are we going to produce? You're going to take the harmony and melody that you already have, and you're going to use those as a starting point, and then to those, you're going to add your bass line in the first octave. So by the end of this, you are going to be sharing a link that has your melody, harmony, and bass line on it. And you're going to be sharing that link with me through Google Classroom, as well as putting it into the Google Doc that you created to hold all of your links so that you have them in a safe place as well. In case you needed a refresher, I included instructions for that in the Google Doc. What are we learning in this assignment? There are different functions that the notes in a chord serve, and that is very important as we build our bass lines. They're called the root, third, fifth, and seventh if your chord happens to have 4 notes to it. We're going to, number 2, identify and create different styles of bass lines. I will present multiple to you. Number 3, the role the bass line plays in a piece of music is very important. And number 4, to follow the form that you decided on in your harmony. That important decision is back. We used it in the melody. We will use it again in the bass. Definition of bass. It is a noun, and it is the lowest sounding part in harmonized music. Functionally, means the bass line is a sequence of single notes. So we're not going to stack any notes in our bass line. That creates a foundation for your song that all of your other parts are built on top of with higher sounding notes. The bass line reinforces the structure that you created with your harmony and can be used to accentuate notes that are shared with the harmony or to add a rhythmic element to the harmony of your song. So a very important role. If you realize you are playing the bass line, you are adding really important harmonic and potentially rhythmic elements to the song. If you have a rhythmic element in particular, you're going to want to play that a little bit louder so that it can be heard by our audience. You will, and I underline this, have quite a bit of freedom in how you create your bass line, but I'm going to ask you to choose from a list of different styles that I will call a menu of bass lines later on. Where are we going to place the bass line in Song Maker? Well, let me go over to the starting point for you, which will be our harmony and melody assignment that we finished up. The empty octave down here at the bottom is going to be where you're going to place your bass line. And where are we going to start? So for our bass line, the first thing you should do is consider the form that you chose when creating your harmony, that you followed when you created your melody, and the bass line is going to follow that as well. So your bass line is going to use the same formula of same, similar, and different as your harmony and melody. So any phrases that are the same will have, again, the same exact matching bass line, but you can create contrast in similar or different phrases. Now, following that, we're going to learn about some different bass styles, the root, third, and fifth information that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And then you're going to start experimenting and building bass lines and listening to how they sound with your song. So let's start with my starting point here, which is my harmony and melody. And I'll go ahead and hit play on this so you can hear it before I make any changes. Now let's talk about some different styles of bass line. And the first one that I have here is all root quarter notes. And this is Bassline Style number 1. And I'll go ahead and play this one for you. I have this right here. This is the most basic of our bassline styles. And this is only using one note for each measure. And this is going to be called the root of the chord. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so I'm only using one note per chord, and I am using what's called the root of the chord. I will explain that term a little bit further below to help you with identifying which is going to be the root of each chord. Now, the modification that you could do for this is that you could experiment with different rhythms other than playing it on every beat that would complement your melody, but it should not match your melody. It should be different. Now, let's take a look at the next style that I want to share with you is called root plus transition tone. And I identify the transition tone with an arrow in each measure. Now, the definition or the characteristics here is we're using the root of the chord. Notice I changed the rhythm a little bit from bass style number 1. And I add a different note at the very end of the measure. Again, the transition tone is labeled with an arrow. It is either going to be the 3rd or the 5th, and we'll talk about how you identify those notes, but they will be notes from the chords. They will match the same color as notes in your harmony. And it's going to be a note that is next door to the root of the next measure. So you'll see the yellow note at the end of measure 1 with the arrow pointing to it is right next door to the light green note of measure 2. The light green note at the end of measure 2 is right next door to the green note at the beginning of measure 3, dark green. Then the orange note at the end of measure 3 is right next door to the red note. Now, it may be that you repeat your root note, which you'll see in the second measure. That's a possibility. It depends on where the neighboring note is. Modifications with this. You can change the rhythm in the root notes. You don't have to use the same rhythm that I have here. You could try using different blocks for that to complement your piece. But the transition tone, the one that is different, should stay at the very end of your measure. Well, what's that going to sound like? Let me show you. I think of this pattern having a little bit of almost like a heartbeat sound to it. The next one is going to be bass style 3. That is called root plus 5th. And for this, it's a pattern of a root. The root is marked with the arrow in each chord. Again, we'll talk about how you find that down below and identify that. And that's going to be played on beats 1 and 3, which is boxes 1 and 5 of each measure. And the 5th is played on beats 2 and 4, which is boxes 3 and 7. Modifications you could do with this is that, again, you could try different rhythms, putting these boxes on different beats, but keeping the alternating pattern the same and making sure that the root is the starting note of the pattern if you change anything else. And let me go ahead and play what this one is going to sound like for you. think that one's got a little bit of almost like a march feel to it. Similar but a little bit different here is bass style number 4. And I call this root third, fifth third. And this is a pattern that starts with the root on beat 1, the third on beat 2, the fifth on beat 3, and the third on beat 4. Paying careful attention to the next section of identifying these different chord tones. Because you want to make sure that you follow this pattern carefully to achieve this sound. The notes are not stacked in the order of the chords, as you can see above. They're in, again, the order of root, third, and fifth. We'll talk about why that might be a little bit later on. But this one is going to sound like this. And I like this one because it uses all the different parts of your chords. So if you want to explore using all the different parts of your chord that you used in your harmony, this would be a good option for you. Number 5 is called a walking bass line. And this is the only one that is going to use non-chord tones in it. And so you're going to see those marked with an arrow. And so the bass line alternates moving up and down of the chord, where the root, third, and fifth are going to be used. The first measure has the notes walking upwards. So you have a red, orange, yellow, green. And then the second measure walking down, blue, green, orange, red. Again, marking out the non-chord tones, which are used as passing tones here. Remember that term from the melody. And what you're going to notice here is that I am stacking them in the order that they occur in the measure. So I have blue, light green, orange, and then red here, following the order of the chord. Now, modification, you could try different non-chord tones if, for example, like in the second measure, there are 2 different blocks that you could choose from. You could try using the note above that, which would be yellow instead of orange, to see if you prefer the sound for that. I did that as I was building mine, and I ended up using the orange note there instead because I liked it better. You could also experiment with changing the rhythm around a little bit rather than using quarter notes on the beat like I have here. This is going to have a little bit of a jazz feel to it because walking bass lines are a characteristic of, in particular, blues and swing, which are genres of jazz. And that's my walking bass line. Now, the last style I have here is not a style of its own. Rather, it is a mixing of 2 styles. I call this 2 and 2. And so this allows you to choose 2 different bass lines and combine them together. I would suggest that you use 2 measures of one style and 2 measures of another. In this case, I chose root, third, fifth, third, and bass style number 2, which is root plus passing tone or a transition tone. And so what you can see on the screen is I have 2 of my root, third, fifth, third, and then 2 measures of my root plus transition tone. Now, Modifications in the phrases marked different, you could try just going with one of the styles you chose to create contrast. So you could break that pattern of 2 and 2 and just go with one of the bass styles in a different phrase to create more contrast. And I'll go ahead and play this for you so you can hear what having the different styles sounds like. And of course, I'd be happy to help you if you were planning on doing the 2 and 2 option in terms of how you would implement that with your specific song. Now let's talk about identifying the root, third, and fifth of each chord, because that's going to play an important role in the bass lines, is being able to find each of these notes. Now, so in a chord, the lowest note of the chord, or the foundation of the chord, is called the root. The third is going to be the middle note of the chord. The fifth is going to be the highest note of the chord. Unless the chord has 4 notes, then that would be the seventh. That's going to be in our 5/7 chord. Now, they do not necessarily need to be built in order. So I created you a chord chart here that labels each one. So in chord 1, you can see root is red, third is yellow, dark green is fifth, and so on. And I labeled some of these chords in bold as being, this chord is inverted. And we'll talk about what that means, but that's important because not every chord is built in order. We can change that a little bit as we construct them, but that changes how you're going to use them for the bass line. So here is my 6-point description of how chords are built. Number 1, chords are made of 3 to 4 notes, and we will name the positions of these: root, third, fifth, and seventh. But only if a chord has 4 notes. The names root, third, fifth, and seventh describe the role each note plays in the chord. Root is the foundation. Third is the interval away from it. The third is a third interval away from the root. That's something we practice in Tone Savvy, depending on which level you're currently in, and determines the character, major or minor, of a chord. Major being happier sounding chords, minor being a little bit more serious sounding. The fifth is a fifth interval away from the root. Again, that's a tone savvy interval that we practice, and completes the choice of the chord sound when added. So it adds a little bit more complexity to the chord when you add that on top of the root and third. The seventh is a seventh away from the root. Again, tone savvy, away from the root, and adds additional complexity to the chord if that's there. The only chord that we use the seventh in is the 5/7 chord. If you'd like ideas on how to use that, if you used that chord, feel free to call me over and we can chat. Now, what is an inverted chord? Sometimes chords are stacked in order: root, third, fifth, and sometimes seventh, but they don't have to be. And to create specific sounds, to adjust for instrument or vocal ranges, meaning some instruments can only play so high or play so low. Some people can only sing so high or sing so low. So you adjust the chords and the notes a little bit to fit the instruments or the people who are going to be performing your music. Or potentially you might adjust the chords and invert them to fit the right places in the music staff, which is mainly the way that we have to do this using Chrome Lab Songmaker. We have to fit the chords to the space that we have, which is why I have inverted some of the chords. So how do the inverted chords affect my bass line? For certain notes or certain chords, again, the ones that are marked, the root is not the bottom. And in some cases, the third is not the middle, the fifth is not the top, which is why you need to use the menu up here to construct bass lines that have a root, third, and fifth, or root and fifth. You need to know where the fifth is, where the root is, and where the third is to build that. So again, pay attention to that menu as you're creating your bass line to make sure you create your bass line using notes in the right places. Now, bass line ideas. I think you should experiment with different ideas and compare them. Remember, you can open up multiple browser windows with your melody and harmony and experiment with different bass lines to see which you like and which you would want to submit. Pay very close attention, number 2, to the root, third, and fifth information. You need that to make sure you build your bass lines correctly. It's okay to mix and match. That is number 6 on there. Well, number 3 here, but number 6 bass style is the 2 and 2. Number 4 here, it is important to experiment with bassline rhythms, or is okay to experiment with bassline rhythms. Small changes are fine, and I add that in modification notes for several of these. Single notes in the bass line sound best. Avoid stacked bass notes at all time. And then we have our action steps down below that you should use to create your bass line. And our grading will be 20 points for this assignment. I am excited to hear your bass lines as you create them. And I'm looking forward to adding our next components after this.